G'day, AJ Mahara here. In this video I want to talk about the Borderline Siren Song. And what does that mean? A siren song refers to an appeal that is really hard to resist, if not next to impossible to resist, but that will, if not resisted, end up in very negative, and I'm going to add painful consequences. So what is, in this context with people with BPD, what is the borderline siren song? It is the promise of so much, and at the same time, it is incredibly so little. The siren song of the borderline is so incredibly, nothing they do on purpose, they're mirroring you, etc., when they get to know you, but it is so incredibly irresistible for anyone who doesn't have strong enough boundaries, anyone who has codependency, anyone who has, whether you're aware of it or not, your own childhood woundedness to one degree or another. The first thing that happens is that you meet the person with BPD, and the siren song begins with the idealization and the mirroring of you. And this person is going to seem so compelling to you, and not only because maybe they're totally physically attractive to you, that's who you've been looking for with regard to that, but also because they're just going to be in that idealization that most people know about, but not unless after the fact. They're going to be mirroring you, so there really isn't any them there. There isn't any self there. So they are totally going to be making you feel beyond fantastic, beyond excited in every which way, shape, and form of the word, and of the feeling, and of the experience. So the borderline siren song is, for so many people, entirely irresistible. And then, what happens when you get into the dating? It could be a honeymoon phase, and then that can go through dating. Doesn't always for people, but people don't watch out for the red flags or don't know them. And then the next thing you know, you're getting into a relationship. Things start to get closer. And it's really important to not lose sight of the fact, as I think many people do, with the siren song, with something so appealing, you can't resist it. And it has with it the promise immediately, really, of the start of a relationship. But you don't know this at the time. Most people don't, at least if it's the first time. It has with it the promise of pain and negative consequences. And so the second thing to think about is how compelling the borderline siren song really is. Think back. What happened? You couldn't resist, right? You really just, it was amazing. It was just too good to be true, which, by the way, is a red flag, but it was just too good to be true. And so you have to realize now that with all that you felt, there probably wasn't a lot of room for critical thinking. People realize this later. And also the second thing is to remember that no one forced you into this, right? Nobody, not even the person with BPD, with the siren song. They didn't force you. They didn't manipulate you. You made your own choices. Might not feel like that, but that's really important for people with codependency or anyone on the other side of somebody with BPD to understand that, at least going forward. And the third thing that happens is as soon as you start that relationship, unbeknownst to you, you start to lose what you do know of yourself. You start to lose yourself to this person, and especially at the first time experience of devaluation, whether that is strong devaluation or maybe not so strong a devaluation, or with a quiet person, quiet BPD or an externalizing acting out borderline. Might be a bit of difference in experience there. But so you have to realize that the minute that this relationship began, in retrospect, people don't know this before, you start to lose yourself, and it just gets more and more painful, and then you start fighting more and more for what you feel like you're losing and how it's not working out, gets you into all that rescuing, enabling behavior, and trying to fix whatever's going wrong with somebody else, or not wrong necessarily, but just what's happening. So it comes from the dance of intimacy, and being in dating and in getting serious, being in a relationship and or getting married. The longer the relationship, the more damage that you will accrue in this dance of intimacy, which really isn't intimacy, but it's the borderlines: push-pull, approach avoidance conflict, get away closer. They'll say so much. I've heard from so many clients, and people on the channel here leave comments as well. But like, she seemed like she really loved me, and she said she really loved me, and then, you know, like one day she told me she really loved me, and then like 2 days later, I don't know what happened, and like she was really giving me the cold shoulder. And these kind of the cyclical ways in which what was the borderline siren song starts to devolve into a painful, confusing sense of loss, sense of instability in a relationship. This person, I don't know if they're coming or going, what's going on, all the different iterations of what happens with that. You're starting to hear a different kind of tune, the siren song of the borderline, because it doesn't really, that siren song, that irresistible everything, it doesn't last beyond the first devaluation. It starts to crack right there. It starts to fall apart slowly right there. And people don't know that. People don't realize that if they don't know what BPD is. And if they, you know, so you're not sure what's going on. And then the next thing you know, the next stage happens. And I'm just not talking about the cycles, but I'm just talking about usually the progression through these relationships, which can be very quick or take many years actually. After the struggle, for not, you know, it can be for physical intimacy too, because that can be really there. And then after the first evaluation and time, and it depends on each person who's in the active throes of BPD, as I coined that term and call it. It depends on how long it takes them to get to that first evaluation and what their adverse childhood experience was, and how that's going to impact physical intimacy, which might be aplenty and very intense and very enjoyable. Then it's going to start to disappear or be less pleasurable, etc. Less frequent, less often. When you're starting to realize something you don't really want to know, and it's hard to figure out amid all the confusion, many people experience this really slow shattering of who you thought the person that you now really love and are committed to, who that individual really was, who you thought they were. You're now starting to realize this isn't the way they seem most of the time. And maybe there's still flashes of who you fell in love with or who you thought they were, but there's something going wrong there, and people don't always know what that is, because it's hard to be in your rational mind about it when you're feeling so incredibly much for this person, the investment in the relationship in every which way, emotionally, often financially. Often people are living together, if not married. Sometimes it will fall apart in dating stages, but still, it's very difficult. So it's just this like slow shattering of who you thought this person was that many people don't really consciously process or understand, out of confusion, out of pain, out of wanting this relationship to work out. People are looking at this stage for the person with BPD to go back to the borderline siren song and that idealization, right? And how it was then and who you thought they were then. That keeps people in these relationships for so long, trying to get that person back, trying to get that person back. But that person really never was. And then some people experience, rather than a slow shattering of, coming to realize this person isn't who you thought they were and what is going on. And many people experience a sudden realization, just a sudden kind of jolting realization. Might be a really painful incident, painful argument. Maybe it involves some physical, acting out towards you, etc. But a sudden jolt of like, what's happening here? How can this person be like this? Or how could they be doing this to me? Because I love them. And who is this person? And people don't always ask the question or think about it that way. It's so highly emotional. So the borderline siren song is one that sounds loudly, immensely, intensely, quickly. It is so compelling, and the package will be so attractive, and the being mirrored and idealized is almost intoxicating, one could say. And this is the way these relationships more or less almost always start. And then the devastation that people feel after a few of these stages, and whatever the cycles are with the person with BPD that you are still with or have been with. And then it becomes, whether you can identify it this way or not, you probably can in retrospect, but then it becomes the fight to get the person back who is idealizing you with the siren song to begin with. People with BPD don't know anything about what a siren song is, or they don't engineer or manipulate that, but they just present you with idealization and mirroring you, which they really don't see who you are in that phase any more than you really see who they really are. But people smack together because of the borderline siren song. And then what smacks together at some point or other is going to, in many ways, maybe little iterations first, or bigger, like could be a slow kind of shattering or a sudden shattering, is going to blow apart. And then people are left fighting to get back to the person that you thought they were. And they never were that person. And so this is not, a lot of people will know this, but again, it's a reminder, and I just wanted to frame it in a different way, because for people that don't know anything about borderline personality, and then they meet somebody with it, whether the person knows they have it or not, then it's like this siren song. It's totally irresistible, and everything is just wonderful. And so that's another big red flag too, for people who maybe, in retrospect at least, you can realize, and many people know, it's a huge red flag when there's that smack together, when the siren song is playing, when everything feels so intensely, amazingly fantastic, like just feels like, and often these people look like the person of your dreams. And then it either slowly shatters, falls away, or suddenly, but you fight to keep it, to get the person back. But that's essentially, besides all the things I talk about, the cycles, etc., that's essentially how people have so much difficulty with this. I mean, there's the emotional and cognitive dissonance, there's Stockholm Syndrome, etc. But it is really the way it began and how intoxicating that is. And there's nothing wrong with feeling really good and feeling really in love and being really attracted to somebody who's really attracted to you, or so you think. But that speed with which and intensity with which these relationships begin are huge red flags that people often don't know about or see at the time. So if you're an ex now of someone with BPD and you're still really in a hurting place, just know I'm out here to help you if you resonate with me. And the other thing too is, people can't necessarily see this coming, and yet, you may have a wounded inner child to some degree from your own childhood, wherein there's something replaying out there subconsciously for you, as I've mentioned in other videos. The point is, boundaries come down when somebody, when you meet somebody and you start really liking them and then you start falling in love with them. So boundaries come down anyway, but then if you don't have adequate boundaries, or you don't know what this is at all, and you don't know what's about to happen to you, or you didn't know, it's so devastating for people. I just want to reiterate again, and validate for you that if you're in a relationship with somebody with BPD and it's really rocky, on again, off again, the cycles, as I've talked about before, and I'll probably talk more about, it all starts with a borderline siren song. And it's just something that seems, or is in the beginning, so irresistible, so right. Everything feels so right. In fact, it feels so right. It's just way too good to be true. Another red flag. But hey. And so what really keeps people stuck in these relationships, or after a relationship ends, especially like if you're ghosted and it's not your choice, the pain, the longing, the agony of all of that, the loss of yourself, all the damage, woundedness you've accrued, actually, has occurred to you and you've accrued, is what you now have to look at and get into a healing recovery journey about. But what blocks people from that most of all is just not wanting to let go of the siren song, of who you thought this person was when you fell in love with them, of who you thought you were loving. That is such a devastating experience for people that I know if you've had the experience, or if you think you're about to, or wherever you might be, or even in different relationships, it might not be exactly like a siren song, but it can be in cycles. The siren song of the borderline does extend to any and all relationship types, friendships, etc. Will be to different degrees, of course, in different contexts. But that person is just so amazing to meet and to know. Or if it is your parent, you might still be singing the siren song of your parent with BPD and not seeing enough of what is happening to yourself and how and why you've developed codependency, at the very least, with a borderline mother or parent. It's the same for mothers in 25% with an adult child with BPD. The siren song is in cycles. The siren song is less in cycles, but can be in cycles in significant other relationships. They can hoover. You can reverse hoover. You can stealth hoover. Hoovers happen both ways. People try again, on and off relationship cycles. But the siren song will never be as intoxicating the second or third or 10th time as it was the first time. Might be close. But people don't realize that they're traveling around the same cycles and circles, each time with the hope that it's going to get better. And for most people, sadly enough, it just doesn't. And so people with codependency have a natural avoidance, maybe subconsciously unknown to you, a natural avoidance of their own pain. And also sometimes looking at their own responsibility in things. Because everything that happens between somebody with BPD and somebody with codependency, it's not all one-sided, and I'm not saying that it's equal either. So I hope that was helpful. If you think about a siren song and how it's so appealing, it's almost irresistible, and then that song stops playing pretty quickly, even if that quickly happens to be 2-3 years or 2-3 weeks. People lose themselves. And what are you supposed to do then? And it's really difficult to move out of, and there are addictive factors in these relationships too. Anyway, hope that gave you food for thought. It was helpful.